Welcome to Horizonte, a weekly series where we take a look at important issues through a Hispanic lens. I'm your host, Catherine Anaya. Does President Trump still have the Hispanic support that he had on Election Day? A recent Pew Research Center survey shows support among Hispanics for the president is falling off. Joining me now to discuss more about what this shift means is Dr. Edward Vargas, an associate professor at Arizona State University's School of Transborder Studies, and Stella Rouse, director of the ASU Hispanic Research Center and professor in the School of Politics and Global Studies. Nice to see you both. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right in. Dr. Vargas, you talked to Latinos about 100 days after President Trump took office. Tell me about that and why you believe this shift is happening.
Yeah, similar to other polls that we've seen come out, for example, with the Pew Hispanic Center, Research Center, BSP Research, Unidos, a bunch of other polls have been showing this sort of pessimism about where Latinos sort of view themselves inside this country, as well as the economic concerns and burdens that they're facing. I think the people who have, sort of shifted towards Trump in the last election were either first-time voters or people who are kind of been independent, and really the story of economic security really attracted them to a Trump administration, and many of them feel either deceived or they feel like this hasn't gotten better. In fact, maybe their lives have gotten worse since this election.
Did you notice a little bit of that sentiment even after 100 days?
Yeah, right away. Right away, we started seeing some of this come out and with the polls, but just in general, just the inflation has sort of kept increasing. Interest rates hadn't gone down. Then not even, there's the economics piece, but then there's also the social aspects of the deportations and people feeling that their community is under attack.
I want to get back to all of that in just a moment, but Stella, we have some polling on this issue. Let's take a look at that. In 2024, 46% of Hispanic voters cast their ballots for Trump. Now that's up from 32% in 2020. The Pew Research poll results from October of 2025 show that tide is turning. 5,000 Latino adults were surveyed, and that is all Latino adults, not just registered voters. 70% of them said they disapprove of Trump's performance. But among those Hispanic voters who did vote for Trump, support remains strong, with 81% saying they support him. However, that's down from 93% at the start of this term. And 65% of all Hispanics surveyed say they disapprove of Trump's approach to immigration. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers, but Stella, you did some research on Latino identity before the election. So when you look at those numbers and then look back at what you discovered before the election, what do you see? Anything strike you as happening to create this shift?
Yeah, I mean, I think the economy is a huge issue. As Edward said, a lot of Latinos voted for Trump because they were disappointed in the way the economy was going under Joe Biden and thought that Trump, with his promises, could turn the economy around for them. So there's a lot of buyer's remorse among Latinos. I think, the identity picture of it is complex and multifaceted in many ways, where there are a lot of Latinos that don't have a connection to immigration per se, a direct connection, but certainly the way that President Trump has tackled immigration, I think, hits a nerve with Latinos, even if they don't know someone who is an immigrant or who is at risk for deportation. It's just an approach that I think a lot of Latinos don't approve of. So
do you think, Dr. Vargas, that this is more about economics then and social issues rather than politics?
Well, I think it's the intersection of these things. As many things, it's not as black and white, right? This is very, brown and tan and other colors, which kind of changed sort of this conversation. I think what we did learn is that Latino voters are up for grab, and you have to compete for them. The GOP did a really good job of getting folks who would have maybe never voted, who are first-time voters, particularly made big inroads with men, particularly men in rural communities. So I think that what ended up happening as well was that the Latinos are also upset that, the Democrats didn't do anything for 10 years. For 4 years during the first administration in terms of immigration. So they were looking for something new. But what they ended up getting, like my colleague says, is remorse to say, I voted for you, but you said you were going to go after like criminals and bad people, but you're going after my paletero. You're going after, my workers who are hardworking individuals. Just today it was released that Small Business Administration, SBA, is going to stop giving loans to permanent residents. This will happen March 1st. This has a lot of us concerned, particularly as we know that Latino and Latino immigrants have really high levels of business entrepreneurship. They start a lot of businesses. So what does this mean? That this isn't what people signed up for. And I think that's people's problem.
Well, and you said, Stella, that, a lot of this is tied to the president's immigration enforcement that's been happening and escalating all over the country. Talk to me a little bit about how students at ASU are feeling, because they're out there protesting, multiple protests just recently. Talk to me a little bit about how their sentiment is and how it may have shifted since the election.
Yeah, I think young people are a huge part of the story, and particularly young Latinos. We saw protests just last Friday on ASU's campus, and we're seeing it not just on ASU's campus, but at the Capitol. And young people are leading those protests and those marches. A lot of them are young Latinos that are leading that, and they are being hit particularly hard by these policies, not only economic, but immigration. And those things intersect, as we talked about. It's multifaceted. But we see young people feeling the effects of inflation. When young people are polled, inflation is number one across partisan divide as being one of their major concerns. Another thing that we don't talk a lot about is the effects of AI. Young people, especially Latinos, have the highest concern for AI taking away opportunities for them. And we know that this administration has gone full-fledged into AI and supporting AI businesses. And that's another concern that I think hits both, all the factors that we talk about in terms of perhaps this administration losing support among Latinos and especially young Latinos.
I see you shaking your head, Dr. Vargas, because I don't think we do talk about the AI component enough.
That's right. I think when we look at workforce in the future, I think a lot of Latinos are questioning, what does this workforce look like? What does the reduction of, for example, opportunities for student loans, those being cut off? For example, if you want to go into medical school, we know that a medical school education costs a lot of money. So if we're saying the cutoff is $150,000, there's no way our students can compete to go into that workforce, into the medical workforce. So I think there's a lot of barriers and the withdrawal of, for example, programs through the Department of Education. And so I think that has a lot of concerns for things. Again, people didn't sign up for this, right? They didn't sign up for government shutdown that lasted as long as it. The loss of health care, for example, this isn't what was promised under this Trump's administration.
Let's go back to immigration for just a moment. In Minneapolis, Renee Good, Alex Preddy, shot and killed by immigration officers. In Arizona, of course, we've talked about seeing a dramatic increase in immigration enforcement and protests. People are furious. They're frightened. More than half of the Latinos in the Pew survey that we've been referencing said they fear deportation for themselves or someone they know, even though many are U.S. citizens. So I would love to ask both of you, what does this tell us about the immigration policy in terms of how it's being felt emotionally in our community?
Yeah, I think people's big concern is the lack of due process. The reality that as a U.S. citizen, you can be detained, you can be put in detention, and you have no recourse. Just recently, there was testimony where you had 3 different U.S. citizen individuals who have been detained, who were locked up. One incident in Chicago where a woman was shot. So it's happening. I think people in Arizona, particularly during the SB 1070, they understand what this looks like, what martial law looks like. And I think that is really concerning for our families, in our communities, in our schools, places where ICE would never go to schools, to hospitals. This was uncharted in the past. So I think that has a lot of concern for our community.
But I think even among some folks who were here during SB 1070 are saying this is worse than even that was.
That's right.
And that was terrible.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the same thing?
Absolutely. I think even with SB 1070, there were barriers that kept sort of the aspect of challenging this through legal channels. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. A lot of SB 1070 was struck down. We have a situation now where the administration is just making policy on their own, oftentimes subverting the Constitution. Putting out memos that says, ICE agents don't need a warrant from a judge to break into someone's house. This is just unprecedented, right? The guardrails that we have had up in the past, or at least that were respected in the past, are not being respected by this administration, and I think that has everyone really scared. You're not protected as a citizen anymore, or a naturalized person here. You're at risk no matter what.
Well, and according to that Pew Research study, even Latino Trump voters are saying that immigration enforcement has gone too far, even if they don't feel personally at risk. So what should we take away from that point?
I think one key point to this is that Latino voters are up for grab. If you want them, you try to create policies which are inclusive, which include us, which make us feel like we are U.S. citizens, like everybody else, that we are protected under the Constitution. And, the midterms are coming up. We're already seeing a tide. The tides are turning in many ways. And so we're looking forward to 2028. And hopefully, some folks had their turn. And hopefully, maybe at that point, other people will have a turn to lead this country in the right direction.
Stella, how do you feel this is going to impact upcoming elections?
I think one concern of many, including Latinos, is whether we are going to have free and fair elections in 2026. We're already seeing signs of potential threats to those elections. The raid that was done in Fulton County, Georgia, just this past week by the federal government. So I think there's a lot of concern that if the administration, uses extrajudicial means for immigration, what else can they do? What other uses could they put that in? And I think the elections is a big concern. People are waking up to things that were promised by this administration that have not come to fruition, but instead have gone in the opposite direction. And as Edward said, I think there are a lot of what we call low propensity voters among the Latino population. They don't pay attention to everything that goes on day to day. So maybe they didn't see the warning signs before the 2024 election or in following Project 2025 or anything like that, like we do on a day-to-day basis. But they're waking up to the realization of the policies that are being implemented and how that affects not only their communities, but those that that serve their communities or that are employed by that community. So I think it's a real wake-up call in a good way, right, where people are paying attention. Unfortunately, that's what we need with what's going on. But I think certainly there's a lot of concern moving into 2026 and to later this year.
And since you both deal with students on a regular basis, we saw a lot of student engagement with the last election. Do you see that happening again?
Yes, even more so.
Yeah.
Every year, Latinos turn 18 at a really, really large number. So we know particularly that came out of this Pew Hispanic Research poll is that unfavorability or pessimism was really young people. It was young people, young women who were going to come out.
Yeah, I agree. We've been waiting for that strength in numbers that we always talk about. We saw that in the last election, and I think we're going to see that even in greater numbers, particularly for a midterm election where usually turnout is a lot lower. I think we're going to see large numbers in this midterm election coming up.
Well, we will be watching, and there is a lot to watch these days. So thank you both for joining me and sharing your perspectives. I appreciate it always.
Thank you, Catherine.
Good to see you. That's our show, and thank you so much for watching. For Horizonte and Arizona PBS, I'm Catherine Anaya. We'll see you next time.